This is one of my favourite subjects to talk about. And in the 10 years that I've worked here, a lot of that time I have provided advice to our members about this kind of stuff. And I'm going to start with saying that there is no greater gift as an employer than what you have in the minimum employment period or the probationary period. So Fair Work refer to this as the minimum employment period before an employee can lodge an unfair dismissal claim. If you have 15 or more employees, you have 6 months. If you have less than 15 employees, you have 12 months. So I reckon 80% of businesses I talk to with a performance issue, the person has just ticked over their minimum employment period. Once that minimum employment period ticks over, we need to jump through a lot more hoops in order to terminate somebody. Having said that, there's a whole bunch of things that we can do before we need to terminate, and we'll talk about some of those as we move through. So this morning we're going to cover off setting and monitoring performance expectations, identifying and responding to performance and attitude issues, and improving workplace culture. So if you haven't been to any TCCI training, you're getting like a real bargain here, because usually it's about $200 to come to a session and get some of the tips and tricks that we're going to talk about today. The first thing I want to talk about is the bus. Now, I find it easy to learn when I have an analogy. And the example I like to give is that your workplace is a bus. And there are rules for the people that are on the bus. And if you want to stay on the bus, you have to follow the rules. The bus is also headed to a destination. And that's generally the purpose or the reason that your organisation exists. Now, your job as managers, owners, leaders is to make sure that everybody knows what the rules of the bus are and where that bus is going to. And if people don't like the bus that they're on, then they are more than welcome to jump off at the next bus stop and catch a bus somewhere else. Just try to mute. Not sure who, I think that's it. Sorry. So that's my first piece of gold for you. Think about your workplace as a bus. If you don't like the bus, you can get off it. But it's also not fair to kick people off the bus if we haven't told them what the rules and the destination are and given them an opportunity to learn those rules and abide by them. All right. Maybe next. No, the bus is so popular it doesn't want to go. Okay, so when we're setting expectations for people, I am a fan of, wherever possible, using SMART goals. And it's really just making sure that when we're communicating our expectations, whether it's somebody's performance of a task or whether it's the way we want them to behave in the workplace, we should be, where possible, specific about what our expectations are. Try and make things measurable where possible. Make sure that we're asking people to do things that are actually achievable and realistic, and wherever we can, put some timeframes around that. So you can't always make things strictly SMART, but as long as people have a really clear picture of what we want them to do or what we consider to be effective performance, it gives them a much better chance. So I'll often use the example of, if I've said to somebody, I need you to process all of that documentation, and I need it to be done accurately, and it should take you about an hour. If that person has finished within 20 minutes, they've probably missed a few steps, or they've found the most efficient way humanly possible to do that task. But by the same token, if that person is still going after an hour and a half, they can measure their own performance and go, that's taken me too long. Also, if they get it done within the hour, but we have to fix 17 things in that document, then they're aware of the fact that the standard to what they completed that task at is not what we expected. And I was talking to a business about this the other day, that unfortunately the manager had actually been keeping a record for the last few weeks of the number of mistakes somebody had made in their role. And so they actually had a really nice evidence base to have an initial discussion with that employee about what they can do to support them to make sure that those mistakes aren't occurring. But if we can't articulate what the expectation is, it's not very fair on people to expect them to meet this unspoken standard. Behaviour is another thing. We often don't think we should have to tell people about our expectations in terms of show up to work on time, don't spend all day on your phone, have a shower, iron your clothes, come back from lunch on time. And a lot of employers will say to me, I shouldn't have to tell them that. They should already know it. I think making sure that you're not assuming that people know what your expectations are is also really important. So if there's things that are happening, what you really need to make sure is, have I actually set those expectations clearly, or am I just making the assumption that that person knows those things? And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. So as I said, think about what success in your organisation looks like and paint a picture. So what does somebody that's effective in that role look like? What sort of things should they be doing? What sort of things should they not be doing? I was working with another employer who had an employee for over 12 months, and that over that 12 months, the employee had taken way too long to do the tasks. The things that they did needed to be fixed. And the employer was at a loss as to why this person couldn't perform. But again, there was no actual expectation given. So when that employee was given a task, they weren't told how long it should take them, or what accurate and completion to standard looked like. And so they were trying to hit this kind of invisible target, or trying to find the end of a rainbow. So it's really important to start with what success looks like and work backwards from there. Around what sort of expectations we want to communicate. What's really important in that role? Is it about how many times they engage with your customers or clients? Is it about how long it takes them to do things? Is it about how accurately they do things? Is it about how well they communicate with their colleagues and other people in the organisation? So it might be all of those things, but we need to make sure that we communicate that to the employee, because otherwise they might think they're doing a great job because they're out there dealing with all of your customers and clients, but they're not actually doing the paperwork or the back end of the role that allows the organisation to actually deliver the service or the product to your clients. Another way of looking at it is, where do things often go wrong? So if you have common performance issues, having a look at what you might be able to do in terms of setting some clear, smart goals or expectations to address those recurring issues, instead of kind of being constantly frustrated by them. Other ways to set expectations. I'm a big fan of having a code of conduct. A code of conduct really sets out your expectations in relation to how people behave in the workplace, whether that's towards colleagues or to customers or volunteers or external stakeholders. I've read many codes of conduct. I actually had somebody ask me the other day, why don't we have a policy on murder? And I was like, I feel like it's implied that we don't allow murder in the workplace. But yes, you make a good point. We have a policy about everything else. So if you want to list that off in your code of conduct, please don't murder your colleagues. That's great. But I'm really not sure what sort of impression that's going to create for somebody on their first day. And if you need an example code of conduct, lots of them online, or I'm happy if you want to shoot me an email, I can send you a bit of a template one. But codes of conduct in terms of behaviour, really important, and then supported by behaviour-related policies and procedures. I would argue if you employ staff, you should have a bullying and harassment policy at the very least. And from a legal perspective, you also need to have a very clear and comprehensive sexual harassment and sex-based discrimination policies. So legislation was passed last year requiring businesses to take a positive stance in terms of preventing sexual harassment and sex-based discrimination in the workplace. And they too also set out those expectations. I dealt with a business a few months ago that had to terminate somebody because of some behaviour that was occurring in the workplace. And it was things that you would think you don't need to tell somebody, like don't follow your colleagues around after work. If somebody says that they don't want to go on a date with you, maybe leave them alone. Policies just make it much easier to manage those sorts of behaviour. And in some cases, they can actually prevent it, because if we're very specific with the examples of the sorts of behaviour we won't tolerate, and we set that out at the start of employment, then people can kind of go, oh yeah, I know what I can and can't do. Again, don't assume that everybody has the same set of rules for how they behave in the workplace. Team training is also a great way to set expectations. So you can do that internally, or you can bring in external training providers. And talk about what our rules for communicating with each other are, how we want to, respond if we're feeling really stressed out and, can't be bothered peopling today, as I hear sometimes. but actually, having an opportunity for everybody to contribute to how we want to communicate and behave with each other in the workplace and what we should do if things aren't going right. If you're not sure about what's a reasonable expectation, think about other people performing the same or similar roles, or people that might have done that role previously. If you don't have enough performance against that. So if it takes, John an hour to do an oil change, and that seems like a reasonable amount of time, then that's probably a good starting point in terms of setting some expectations. As I said to you before, it's not a bad idea to reverse engineer some of this stuff. So if things are going wrong, what could we do differently to get a different outcome? And that might be interpersonal stuff. It might be, the whole complaining about your colleague to other colleagues, but not to the person that's actually the problem. How do we address that? What's a way that we can work as a team to make sure that we've got a really nice, open and positive culture, not one where, every time a door closes, somebody's whispering and we think that everybody's talking about each other. Policies and procedures. So if you do have standard tasks, thinking about whether or not there's any value in putting standard operating procedures in place for those. It really depends though. Sometimes you stifle creativity if you're going to procedurize everything, but sometimes it can be a really useful tool for people learning roles. We're a really small organisation. We have a lot of things that we don't have process that sits around, and often that can lead to things not happening exactly the way we want them to, or a conversation to say to somebody, why did you do that? And they say, well, that's what I thought I was supposed to do. So that whole being clear about how we want people to do things. If there's a set way, here's the process. If it's, I don't care how you get there, but this is what the outcome should be, then that's also fine. It's just what works for your business. I'm not a fan of having 40,000 documents that, nobody's got time to read, let alone adhere to. I think it needs to be fit for purpose. One of the key elements of setting and managing expectations is leading by example. And depending on the structure of your organisation, this can sometimes be challenging. I have a lot of experience working with people that report to the owner of the business, and sometimes the owner might not necessarily be role modelling the most appropriate behaviours. So that can be a little bit challenging, but within your control, making sure that we're walking the talk and we're not telling people that they should be doing one thing while we're off doing something else, and contradicting what we've asked other people to do. So there's lots of ways that we can set expectations. At the end of the day, it's all about communicating effectively. And whether you use team meetings to do that or you use one-on-one meetings, the one thing I would say is if you have a particular issue with a particular person, don't raise it in a staff meeting. Don't send out a group email, because the one person that actually needs that information is not going to take any notice of it. And you're actually going to upset the rest of the team, because they'll be like, well, I didn't do that. I thought I was doing blah, 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 blah. And the person that you're actually directing that communication to is going to be, what are they sending that out for? We don't have a problem with that around here. So if it's one person with a specific issue, we need to put our big people's pants on and we need to address that directly with that person, not passively through the entire team. I went into a workplace once and the entire back of house wall was just covered in memos to staff about this, that and the other. And it looked more like wallpaper than any type of useful type of communication. So, yes, I also would advise doing it verbally, not in writing, because often it can be taken the wrong way when we just send something in writing without any context. But 100% after you've spoken to that person, then put it in writing, because that's the other massive mistake I see in relation to performance management is we have lots of conversations, but we don't document any of those. And so when we're not getting a performance improvement, we have to start from the very beginning, because if it's not written down, if we didn't document it, it's very difficult to prove that something actually happened. Okay. Setting expectations, right. I'll just stop for a minute. Building, oh, hang on, there's a comment there. Sorry. With workers through general conversation can be built. 100%. I would 100% agree with you, David. I think that came from you. It's all about the relationship. It's amazing what you can get away with if you've got a good relationship with people and they feel like you actually communicate with them because you want to talk to them, not just, uh-oh, here comes David, I must be in trouble again. And I think most of us at some point in our career have absolutely worked for managers like that. But yeah, if people feel like it's a relationship-based thing, I'm giving you this information to help you, not to try and get rid of you or make you feel bad. Thank you, that was great. Any other comments or questions while I'm talkie? Go back to here. All right. So I've just thrown a few examples in here. One of the easiest SMART goals or expectations, and it's very old school, but most of you would remember this. You need to answer the phone within 3 rings. We should have a friendly tone of voice, and we should be using some sort of standardized organizational greeting. Something that you'll find in codes of conduct is engaging with customers and colleagues in a respectful way at all times. So these are SMART goals. Completing all of our paperwork accurately and within designated timeframes. Responding to customer and client emails within 1 business day. So we can actually, in most of these cases, we can observe these expectations being met, which means, sorry, I'm just going to let somebody in. If they're not being met, we can also observe them and follow up on them. But first, hang on, I'm going to go to the right screen. Another one of my favourites, you have to coach before you can umpire. And I do apologise for the 2 men, but clearly there's some sort of gender bias when you're looking for coaches and umpires for images. I could only find them. When we've identified that there's a performance issue, the first thing we need to check is, have we actually explained what we expect? Have we given the people the support or the time or the information that they need to be able to meet that standard? Or are we just assuming that that person has that information or is deliberately not doing something? Most people don't get out of bed in the morning to come to work and do a crappy job. They're doing the best that they can with the information that they have. And I think it's super important to remember that when we're observing performance issues, because a lot of personal biases will come into play here, where we go, I shouldn't have to tell that person that, or that person's late and they haven't said anything. They haven't said, I'm sorry, I'm 5 minutes late or whatever. If you don't say anything to them, you're effectively condoning the behaviour. So if I've been showing up to work 5 minutes late for the last 3 weeks, and then you finally turn around and go, why are you late? I'm like, oh, sorry, I didn't think it mattered. I was late once and nobody said anything to me. So I thought I could just start whenever and, maybe finish 5 minutes late, but in most cases still finish on time. And so when we're looking at how we address performance issues, the first thing you need to do is think about, have we coached this person? Have we given them the tools they need to meet the expectation? And once we're confident that we've done that, that's when we can put our umpire hat on and we can start to actually manage that performance in a constructive way. But quite often, really simple stuff, like I had an employer once that their staff member was using their credit card to buy things that they didn't think they should be buying with the credit card. And the first question I said was, have you ever had a conversation with them about what is an acceptable expense for your company credit card? The answer was, well, they should know that. And I'm like, well, if you haven't told them, and for the last 6 months they've been buying themselves a coffee at 10 o'clock every morning with their company credit card, then you really need to go back to the start and set some ground rules. We need to coach. We need to put in place a credit card use policy. And then once the person is aware of that and they continue to do the wrong thing, then we have an obligation or the right to umpire that person or to manage their performance. But yes, we need to make sure that we've given them the tools that they need before we do that. All right. One of the models we use, this is called the 5 keys to unlocking performance. And it's based on the theory that most of the reasons why people don't perform properly are found in the workplace. And the idea is you think about, take your performance issue, do they know what to do? So have we actually given them the instructions or the information? Do they know why they need to do it? Because that's actually really important for people understanding the contribution of their task or their job to the greater organisation or the bus getting to the destination we want it to go on. Do they know how to do it? So have we actually given them some instructions, some coaching, some supervision, whatever it might be? Have we given them the chance to do it? So have we got a workplace culture that's supportive of helping people learn? Have we given people the right tools and equipment to be able to do it? The bane of my existence is the IT system that we have to use. There is always something wrong with it and it drives me crazy. And if anybody was ever like, you took too long to do that, I'd be like, I don't have the tools I need to be able to do it efficiently because it takes me 5 minutes just to be able to hit the print button. Have we given them the time to actually get the experience to do things quickly? And depending on the complexity of the task, that can take quite some time to be able to go from I know what to do, but to be able to get enough experience to be able to do it as efficiently as somebody that's had lots of practice at this is really important to consider, because sometimes we go, oh, it takes Stacey too long to do that job, so I'm just going to do it myself. And therefore that person never gets the opportunity to actually get the experience to become efficient and effective in that task. And am I being led to do it? So have we got good leadership that's providing feedback, that's developing rapport with us so that we can have those conversations? And there's a whole checklist that kind of goes with it. If you're interested, I'm more than happy to send it through to you. But yeah, just thinking about, do they know what to do? Do they know why they need to do it? Do they know how to do it? Have we given them every chance to be able to do it? And are we leading them in a way that is conducive to them being to them performing and meeting our expectations? So when you've identified a performance gap, thinking about whether it's task or behaviour, so we don't like something we've seen or something's not to standard. What is the expected standard? Is it the timeframes? Is it the accuracy? Is it the behavioural stuff like the communication or the attitude and behaviour? And before we can discuss a performance issue with somebody constructively, we need to be really clear what that performance gap is. Examples are absolutely paramount. It's not that you take too long to do a job. You need to give them the specific examples. On Tuesday, I asked you to, paint the whiteboard. I explained that it should take you 15 minutes. I came back 3 hours later and you were still going, like, what's going on? So really clear examples, the date, any witnesses, what happened, what didn't happen, what the consequence was. Because the first thing that somebody will say to you if you try and say to them, your customer service is not great. Well, what do you mean it's not great? Can you give me an example? And if we don't have good examples, then it's really hard for the person to understand what we're looking for in terms of that performance improvement. But also from a Fair Work perspective, having examples documented, very helpful in terms of providing evidence that there is actually a performance issue there. So a very simple mathematical equation there. And hot tip, if you can't articulate what the expected standard is, you've probably just found your problem. I often get that feedback from employers, oh, they just weren't right. Okay, well, why weren't they right? What were you looking for? I did a lot of work in hospitality years ago, helping them with workforce stuff. And they're like, they're just not sending me the right people for the jobs. And I'm like, okay, well, what does the right person look like? And they couldn't tell me. And it's like, well, how can you say to somebody, you're not what I want, but I don't actually know what I want, but you're not it? Like, it just seems like a very challenging situation for everybody, employer or manager, as well as the person trying to meet the standard. Okay, I cannot emphasize enough that the sooner you address an issue, the easier it is to manage. It will most likely not go away by itself. It would be great if that happened. It's a bit like conflict. Wouldn't that be amazing? If I just ignore it for long enough, it will just disappear and go away. And that's often when I'll get an employer call me, is that there's been this problem, this problem, this problem, this problem, this problem, and now I've had enough and I want to get rid of that person. And so the first thing I'll say is, have you documented any of these performance issues? And I reckon you can guess the answer. It's no. And so we have to start at the very beginning. You have to start afresh. If you haven't documented it, it hasn't happened. And Fair Work will not accept, oh, but I said something to them 17 times. They will say, where is your evidence of that? And if you have an organisation that has multiple layers, yes, I'll come back to that question. That's a good question. If you have an organisation that has multiple layers, anybody who is managing staff needs to understand the critical importance of documenting conversations. And sometimes it might be a really informal one, and it might be that I've observed somebody that's not wearing their PPE, or they've done something, and you might say you need to do that. But I would then send an email to HR or to somebody else and go, I spoke to this person today about this thing, because then at least you can have a bit of a pattern of a recurring issue. That's the informal stuff. Now, when we have to have a formal meeting, yes, we can invite them to have a support person. Yes, that can make the problem bigger, having a support person involved who is another staff member. And as the employer, you have the right to say, I don't think it's appropriate that that person is your support person. Now, that's not a blanket rule. You might not have any issues with them bringing somebody else in as a support person from your organisation. But if you feel like it's going to affect the process, then you do have the right to say, we would prefer you not bring somebody that is actually a colleague or somebody else in this workplace. It needs to be somebody independent. And if you can anticipate that's going to happen when you're asking them if they'd like to bring a support person, I would probably put something in there around the lines of this person should not be an employee of our organisation. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so you don't want people going in as a support person and telling everybody else what happened in that meeting either. So having that independent is very important. And just checking that I'm not assuming things. A support person is not there to advocate on behalf of the staff member. They are literally there to listen and to support the individual. If that person starts to advocate on behalf of them or disrupts your meeting or makes it difficult for you to do what you need to do, and because sometimes people's spouses or people's parents like to come to these meetings, so they get very passionate about that person that we're talking to. You have every right, if they are affecting the meeting, you have every right to ask them to, please be quiet. Your role here is this role. And if you continue to disrupt the meeting, we may have to terminate this meeting and meet again at another time. So, yes. Look, I've worked with workplaces where people's support person's actually been another manager in the organisation and they were fine with it. But I've also dealt with workplaces where it's been another staff member and it's just not appropriate. Just not appropriate for the meeting. Okie dokie. So, yes, the longer you leave it, the harder it's going to be. I'm a big fan of just a conversation. I think that's the point you were getting at with the rapport building with people. It's like, hey, I noticed this happened yesterday. What's up with that? It's not like you, or you know that we don't do things like that. Very much the starting point. It's an exchange of information. It's not feedback. It's not criticism. It's just I'm giving you some information. You can't get a better phrase for managing performance and attitude than the standard you walk past is the standard you accept. Part two of that is the standard you accept is the standard you deserve, which is a bit harsh, but in many cases true. So sometimes if you're managing or supervising people, you're going to feel a little bit like a parent because you're constantly reminding people that they need to do or not do things. If everybody did what they were supposed to do when they were supposed to do it, how they were supposed to do it, we wouldn't need managers or supervisors. So that consistency piece is absolutely paramount. As soon as you let somebody do something and they observe that you've let them do it, you've effectively told them it's okay. When you want to raise an issue, think about the location. So depending on the sensitivity of the issue, if it's about quite a complex performance issue, probably not in public, but if it's get off your phone or you're back late from lunch, those things do not need a private meeting in a secluded location because it's literally just, hey, what are you doing? Versus we need to have a conversation because we've got some issues we need to talk about. Think about the timing. How's the person likely to respond? Are you better off to do it at the end of the day or allow that person to take the rest of the day off if you think they're going to be upset by it? It does need to be relatively close to the time that the incident occurred, though. Don't save up 6 months worth of, criticisms and lump them all on a person. That's just going to make them feel like shit and probably cause them to go out on a stress leave claim because they thought they were doing a great job and now you're telling them 6 months in that they're not. Think about how you deliver the information. So it really needs to be not emotional. So the timing is important for you as well. Don't wait till you're really frustrated to do it because it's going to come across in your tone of voice and the words that you choose. I actually was dealing with a business a few weeks ago and somebody made a really inappropriate comment at the end of an interview, and the person's manager was present, and they said to me, "Oh, I just waited a few weeks before I brought it up with them." And the comment would have been in breach of a sexual harassment / bullying policy. And I said, you shouldn't wait for stuff like that. If it's something that's quite serious, you need to say, can we have a word? And you need to go and deal with it straight away, because that also highlights the gravity of it, not that you've gone away and thought about it for 2 weeks and decided to do something about it 2 weeks down the track. Procedural fairness is one of the absolute pillars of what makes the difference between an unfair and a fair dismissal. And all procedural fairness is that the employee has a chance to respond to the issues, and that we give them the opportunity to and the support to improve. And that has to be very clearly documented. And look, I've seen some really straightforward dismissals, like an assault in the workplace where the person's been, you're sacked. They've gone to Fair Work because the person wasn't provided an opportunity to respond. Yes, 99.9 times out of 100, that person's going to get fired, but we need to present the allegations to them, give them time to respond, and then come back and make our decision. And there have been cases in Fair Work where people have actually dated the termination letter the same date as the meeting. And the letter's been written before the meeting's even started, and those businesses ended up paying some money because they weren't affording that employee procedural fairness. They'd already decided the outcome of the meeting before they had it. So one of the golden rules is, if you are going to terminate, make sure that your termination letter is not on the same date as the meeting with the employee. Informal discussions don't require a support person, but I think if you want people to know that you're serious, and the performance management process may end in termination. Not that it's going to, but it might. So you might have had a few informal chats with people and it's not getting you what you want. That's when I'd be looking at having a meeting and bringing along a support person. If you have less than 15 employees, it's probably a shorter lead up to that process. But if you have more than 15 staff, which I think most of the people that are online today do, the support person is that this is next level. Yeah. Your job may be in jeopardy. You should bring a support person because you're going to need somebody to be listening to what's going on. And I will just reinforce, document every conversation. And if you've agreed to do some stuff, I would be sending an email after the meeting saying, well, thanks so much for your time. Great to discuss these key issues. Here are the things that we've agreed to do. Let's touch base again next week or in a fortnight or whatever the time frame might be, to check in on that performance. And that's the other bit that we'll often miss or we won't worry about, is that check-in. Because regardless of whether they've made the performance improvement or not, you should be checking in with them to go, that's awesome. You've taken all that feedback on board, seen a great improvement in your performance or your attitude, so impressed, keep up the great work. If you don't acknowledge their performance improvement, what motivation is there for them to keep doing the right thing? I've gone to all this effort to do what you asked me to do, and you haven't even bothered to acknowledge that I've done it. So, you can sort of see why people might drop their performance back off again. And the flip side is, if they haven't made the performance improvement, don't give up. You need to, at first you don't succeed. I was really hoping that was the next slide. You really need to keep being persistent with this. My experience is that most people, if they know that you're not going to back down on this and you continue to be fair and professional in how you raise it, you will either find that they will get on the bus and stay on the bus and they like being on the bus, or they will get off your bus. And it doesn't really matter which way it goes, as long as they decide they're either on the bus and they're committed to it, or they're off the bus and they're going to go somewhere else. So a performance improvement plan, most organisations would have some sort of template for this, but effectively it's just, these are the issues, this is what we're going to do to help it, this is when we're going to check back in to see how we're tracking. You might have regular meetings if a person sort of tends to have peaks and troughs in their performance. Catching up with them once a week or once a fortnight might be a good way of, keeping them in check. Be consistent and be persistent. Offer the support to improve, whether it's internal or external support. A lot of performance issues can be resolved with some internal training. There's so much stuff for free online. I was looking for some Outlook training the other day. I could pay somebody $400 to do a one-on-one one, or I could just jump onto the Microsoft website and I could do their training. So look at what sort of options are available, or ask the person who you're performance managing what sort of options might help them. For behavioural or attitudinal issues, there are actually a lot of tools out there that can help people. So things like, profiling tools. So whether we use things like DISC and emotional intelligence profiles, but there's 4,000 different models out there. But it's, if you've got attitude issues, you can fix it the same way as a task or a sort of tangible performance issue. The person just needs some support with a bit of self-awareness and to understand how their feeling impacts their behaviour, and then how their behaviour impacts other people in the workplace. And a lot of the time people aren't aware that there is actually the ability to change the way we respond to stress, or if we're having a bad day or whatever might be causing our attitude issues. If we can work with people to improve their self-awareness and give them some tools to do something different, then that can often help with some of the attitude stuff. We have a mental health day thing around here. So if you really feel like you can't come to work and be your best self and be on the bus with all the other passengers and have a good time, if you want to work from home or take a mental health day, you can do that. Different workplaces, different workplace culture, it might work or it might not. But just because we're seeing some attitude or behaviours that are not consistent with what we want doesn't mean that we can't approach it the same way we would as if somebody's taking too long to do something or showing up to work late. And in case you haven't got it, document everything. All right. All right. So our initial discussions don't seem to be working. So we've had our informal discussion, the issues persisting. We've had a performance improvement meeting. We've implemented some support strategies. Then we've had still got a performance issue. We'll have another follow-up meeting, maybe offer some different support. Put it back onto the employee. What can we do to help you do this? Here are some things I'm thinking. We would implement that process again. And if we're still not seeing a performance improvement, we might start thinking about dismissal. This is based on it being the same or similar issues. If it's completely different issues, then you kind of got to manage them almost separately, but it may demonstrate that there's a pattern of behaviour where somebody's disregarding your policies or something like that. Unless you are a HR professional, I would strongly advise getting some advice before you terminate somebody, just to make sure that you've ticked all the boxes. I had a really, really unfortunate case maybe 3 or 4 months ago, and the person rang here and they were really, really distressed. They had a couple of casual staff members and somebody had told them, oh, they're casual, you can just sack them. The issue that happened, though, was that those casual staff members had raised a query about their rate of pay and they'd been underpaid. And so whilst the reason for termination was not that, because they were terminated following an inquiry about their rate of pay, they have now gone to Fair Work and lodged general protections claims, saying that they were terminated because they exercised their workplace right. We were able to work with them to settle one of those cases, but there is a huge increase in no-win, no-fee industrial relations lawyers, and these people will not go away. And so now the second case has actually gone to the courts, which means that that business now has to pay a lawyer to represent them to fight that claim. And it was something really simple that if we had have just been able to talk to that person before they terminated the employment, we could have picked up that that was going to be a risk to the business, and actually helped them manage that more effectively so that there wasn't a case for general protections. But there's always so many circumstances that we need to take into consideration before we would go down that termination path. Another option that we'll often look at is we'll look at whether or not we can do a deed of release instead of a termination. So I was working with another organisation with a performance issue, and the employee and the role were just not matched together. The role was actually causing the employee quite a lot of psychological stress. However, the employer was they didn't want to terminate because of general protections, because it's a mental health issue. We went down the path of asking the employee to get some medical clearance to say that they were fit to perform the inherent requirements of their role, which they got. based on what I'd been told by the employer that GP should never have provided it. But, well, we know how we work with GPs and medical certificates. Some are good, some not so good. And in the end, we actually approached the employee and said, hey, look, we don't know if this job's really the best thing for you. If you'd like to think about a career change or changing employers, we'd be happy to provide you some support to do that. And so effectively, the organisation offered the employee an amount of money. They signed a deed of release to say, yep, I'm moving on and I'm not going to make any further claims. Thanks very much. Goodbye. But that process in itself has to be very careful because it can't look like we're trying to pay that person to go away. We're supporting that person to transition into a different role that might be more suited to them. So there's plenty of options on how we can actually, if we're not seeing that performance improvement or we've got a bit of a mismatch between the bus and the bus rules and the journey and that person, there's lots of different strategies that we can use to move them on. Ideally, though, we start these processes with the view that we can actually help that person get to the standard that they want to get to, not necessarily starting the process with termination in mind, because that will also come across to the employee and they'll subtly, if they're good at reading body language, they'll subtly see that you're trying to manage them out. So before you dismiss anybody, you need to make sure that they were aware of the issue. You've given them the opportunity to improve. You've documented all those issues and discussions so that, we've coached, we've done all the coaching piece, and then we've actually attempted to umpire it. The person is aware that if they don't improve their performance, that their job may be in jeopardy, and that we feel really comfortable that everything we've done means that termination would be perceived by somebody else as being fair, reasonable, and just in the circumstances. And that's often when people will resign because they can see the writing on the wall. I can't meet those expectations. I don't want to meet those expectations. I don't want to be on this bus. I don't want to go to where the bus is going. I think I'm just going to opt out. The consequences for not dealing with this stuff is extreme. Like, it can cause huge issues with your workplace culture. And what will happen is the good people in your organisation will go, I don't want to put up with this anymore. I'm going. And you will end up with the people that don't think they can get a job anywhere else staying with you. And the people that you probably wanted to keep will be the ones that go. People are very observant as to what people do and don't get away with in a workplace. The other thing that you will likely see is increased levels of absenteeism, partly because of the workplace culture not being one where people, want to come to work. If I'm doing the right thing all the time and old mate next to me is not and getting away with it, or somebody's treating me like dirt and nobody's doing anything about it, I'm not going to feel that like coming to work. So I'm going to be much more likely to call in sick. And more importantly, particularly around attitude and behaviour in the workplace, depending on what it is, it could be actually presenting a psychosocial hazard to others. There's a new code of practice out in relation to psychosocial hazards, but a lot of it centres around bullying and harassment in the workplace. So we really need to monitor that stuff. And if people are raising concerns or you're seeing stuff that you're not comfortable with in terms of behaviour and attitude in the workplace, we've got to address it quickly before it turns into a workers' comp claim, or before you have people going to Fair Work and requesting a stop bullying order and you've got a whole bunch of other problems to deal with. And that's often the way that I will motivate an employer to do something, is the consequences or the impact this is having on the rest of your team. And that, do you want to lose all of them and keep that one person, or do you want to manage this person and keep all those people? Alrighty. So summing up, I will send you a copy of this presentation. Sorry, I should have probably said that at the beginning. Set the ground rules and address issues early. So the rules of the bus. Welcome to the bus. This is our bus. This is how we roll on this bus. Create solutions to common issues. So if you have got recurring issues, do a brainstorming session, work out how you can address them. You can involve the employees. You can be like, we've seen this issue. What are we going to do about it? Go away, think about it, come back to me with some ideas. Make sure you've coached them properly before you start umpiring them. Document. Remember, the standard you walk past is the standard you accept. Oh, look, I've got a bit gangster over here. Consequences of not managing are more significant than you'll think. Sorry, there's a typo in there. But yeah, that standard you walk past is the standard you accept should be ingrained into every manager and supervisor in your organisation. because consistency with this stuff is paramount. If you've got one supervisor that pulls people up on stuff and another one that doesn't, the staff members will play them off like like children of divorced parents will. That's the best opportunity for people that want to do dodgy stuff, is not having a consistent approach to managing and communicating our expectations. Quick plug, if you know anybody or you are sitting there and you have 19 or less FTEs, we can help you with any of this stuff through Employer of Choice Assist. I'll send you a link if you're interested after this session. I should note, people don't need to be members of the TCCI to access this service. And this service is delivered by our workplace relations and HR consultants, that if we don't have this funding and people access as members, is a fee-for-service service. Duplication. So it's actually really good, really good deal. Best project ever. We've got an upcoming workshop, I think is 2 days from now, tips and tricks for employing young people. So if you've got young people and you're finding them a delight and a challenge and a wonder and a mystery all at the same time, I strongly recommend you register for this webinar. We're going to have Headspace Hobart, that are a youth mental health service, coming along and speaking at that, so that should be a good time for all. The Cost of Doing Business series has started. The second workshop is currently running at the same time as this one, because clearly we did a really good job of scheduling, but we're recording these. So if you're interested in that series, then just reply to the email that you'll get from us to say, can you register me for the rest of them, and can you send me the recordings for the first 2? We've had great feedback from workshop 1. The Cost of Doing Business series is a member-only benefit, but if you're not a member and you don't want to be a member, then you can just pay for the workshops. So questions.